Heritage Park listserv, I think, is the effective draw to get people out. Today we're fortunate to have Rob Bryce from our Continuing Studies department coming out to give us an overview of some of the scenery and history of the Skeena Valley and River. Rob's been with UNBC 20 years. He tells me he's got his pin now, you know. After 20 years, maybe an extra day of vacation. I'm most used to running into Rob in my capacity as a forestry researcher. He used to run a lot of the forestry continuing studies programs. But now he's moved into sort of this eco-cultural tourism, adventure tourism dimension, which I think he's going to tell us about today. So over to you, Rob.
Okay, great, thanks, Phil. And yeah, thanks everybody for coming out. Great to see a good turnout here for a talk on the history of the Skeena area. So this is a passion of mine. I get excited every time I come out here. I don't live in Terrace, I live in Prince George. So we have our campus here, which allows me to come out and do courses and programs and these adventure tours. So for me, yeah, I'm not a historian or anything by any means. I read a lot of books on the history of this area, and most of the stuff I'll be talking about today is based on some of the adventure tours that Phil mentioned that we do. So when I come out here, I'm always exploring beforehand, trying to find new spots and places and features and that we can take some of our guests to on our tours. So I'll be referring to my notes a little bit. There's a ton of dates in that I'll refer to some of the places that we visit. And so I can't kind of digest all those in my mind. But yeah, we got about 100 slides today, starting from Hazelton or Gitwangak all the way down to, actually we'll end up at Porcher Island on Una River. So all the way down the Skeena, and yeah, we'll go that far. I'd also like to mention a lot of the spots here are adjacent to the river. Some of them are on private land, First Nations land. So I always ask people, if you're interested in seeing any of these places, just be respectful. Ask permission if you can. And most people are pretty easygoing and grateful, and will show you around and tell you a little bit about the different sites. So I know when I go out there, I try and be as respectful as possible and talk to different people and see if it's all right if we go in there and take our guests there, and as well, just get permission. So yeah, so we'll get started here. As mentioned, we do a series of adventure tours. We call them educational tours, adventure tours that are basically open to anyone. These aren't for UNBC students. I guess they are kind of relatively expensive, but you can see the series of ones that we have. The majority of them are out here in the Northwest, just with all the interesting stuff you guys have and features and rich history. We do have a couple in the Prince George area. We did have Sternwheelers there going up the Fraser River and then the Chaco River in the Fort George area, so we do a tour there on the Sternwheelers that we had, and some of the same boats. Actually, your Sternwheelers made it to the Fort George or Prince George area after they did their work here on the Grand Trunk Pacific. And the other one we do in Fort George or Prince George is the White Sturgeon Biology Tour. We work with our local First Nations there, the Clay-Leak Canadian. We actually go out and tag sturgeon and radio tag them and do all kinds of interesting things. So, but the one we'll kind of be loosely following today is our Skeena River historical journey, where we take our guests up to Hazelton and make our way down over 5 days down to Prince Rupert. So that's what we'll be kind of loosely following. So you can see the route here, 180, 190 miles, 290 kilometers from Hazelton or Gitwangak all the way down the Skeena River, down past Port Essington, and we'll actually end up at Una River. We'll talk about some of the interesting things there. So this just kind of gives you an idea of our little voyage this afternoon from there. I'll also be referring to some of the Tsimshian names. Gitwangak, I think it's people of the torchlight fishing place. So you'll notice that I always find it intriguing that in the Tsimshian language they have a git or kit in front of their names, and what those places actually mean, and kind of always intrigued me why they call themselves the people of the torchlight fishing place. So yeah, when talking to some of the locals, I'm always kind of quizzing them about that background. But yeah, this will be our journey today. So yeah, Hazelton or Gitwangak. There's a replica of the Hazelton Sternwheeler there that Robert Cunningham had built, and yeah, they have that sitting on the banks of the river there. I think that one ran from 1901 to, or the actual one, 1901 to 1912 on the Skeena River. So yeah, you're going to get a better idea of what these things look like and just how big they were. And the Hazelton actually wasn't all that big of a Sternwheeler. some of the ones that the Grand Trunk Pacific, Foley, Welch, and Stewart ran were massive sternwheelers that plied the waters of the Skeena. Anyone know what this is? Hazelnut, yeah. So where does Hazelton get its name from? Actually, I'd actually never seen one of these until last year when one of our other guides, Fred Seiler, who's here, pointed these out to us. So I took some pictures, and yeah, now I know what hazelnut looks like. And yeah, they grow in this specific microclimate that's just perfect for them in different places around the Northwest. And Hazelton is one of those places. So if you see these around, yeah, that's the hazelnut tree. And then Kassan, yeah, this is where we start. The recreation of an ancient village site there on the junction of the Bulkley and the Skeena Rivers, and yeah, just a very interesting place. You learn a lot going on one of these tours at the museum there, and yeah, they have their longhouses and totem poles and food caches and all kinds of places. So this is home of the Gitsans, another Git name. I think that is people of the River of Mist, and that's the Skeena. They call that the River of Mist. So when you hear the name Kassan. Some of the totem poles there, longhouses. Our next stop is Gitseguecla. So I've driven by this place, I don't know, probably 100 times this First Nations community, and you just kind of do a quick look and off you go. And we made arrangements on our trip to come down and stop there on the river and have some of the locals and one of the elders, Vern Milton, show us around, and they did this grand welcome for us as we got off the boats, and yeah, showed us around the village site, and I was amazed at actually how many totem poles they have in Gitseguecla. So they have some, this is just a couple of the ones that we saw, but there's many that were lying down on the ground now, just resting there, and then many that are still standing and telling us the story and which clan they belong to. So yeah, if you ever have a chance to stop in and know someone at Gitseguecla, definitely go in and you'll see that there actually is a really rich history there. Smokehouses, so we were fortunate enough to as well to get toured around by some of the locals, and I think we visited 2 or 3 different smokehouses there, and they were right in the process of catching the sockeye salmon from the Skeena River, and we got to taste a bunch of different recipes and that from some of the locals there. So this is one of the gentlemen here that had shown us around and had shown us this smokehouse here, and you can see some of the sockeye up there hanging. Gitwangak or Gitwangak, people of the rabbit, so Git or Kit. St. Paul's Church and the bell tower, I think this was 1893 that church was built. And yeah, you can drive right up to this, cross the bridge at Gitwangak, hang a right, and go through the community there, and the church and the bell tower are still there. And yeah, just beautiful structures right on pretty much the banks of the Skeena River. The totem poles, there's, I don't know, 10 or 12 totem poles there, and we were lucky enough there to have one of the elders, Art Matthews, provide us with a tour and talk about some of the totem poles. I think it's customary that you basically only talk about your own clan's totem poles, so he gave us a good rounded history of his clan and talked a little bit about some of the other ones and about the totem poles and reading them from the bottom to the top, and the bottom figures are actually the most important ones out there. So yeah, really interesting talk there, especially when you have one of the locals and one of the elders there giving you a good background on it. So yeah, and you can drive to this. They're right on right next to the band office there, and if you go by there in the summertime, you see a steady stream of people coming by and having a look at them. This is the Woodcock Airstrip, and the highway is right here. So this is the highway, Kitwanga Terrace down here. So you drive by this all the time if you're going from Terrace to Kitwanga, and I had no idea this was even here. And it's just across the river, a little patch of trees here. There used to be a car that I think it just fell down this year. We had a fishing run we called Car Body because there was a car over on this bank, and you'd see it driving down the highway. And I think it's since fallen into the river, or they pulled it back. And yeah, but there's some old buildings in here. This was an old relief airstrip from World War II, I believe, called Woodcock, and researched a little bit on who it was named after, and there was a gentleman down in in the lower Skeena there at Woodcock's Landing, and some people surmised it might have been named after him. But yeah, there's still a few structures in there, and you can actually drive the back road here down here, and there's a gate here, and I asked permission from the people across the road, and they said, yeah, no problem, just put the latch back on when I leave, and allowed me to go in and have a look at this. This was actually a drone shot. I have a drone and launched it over here and got some aerial photos. But yeah, when we come down on our trip, we can't remember, put a boat in here somewhere and walk through the field here and have a look at the airstrip. So another feature that I had no idea was there until I did a little bit more exploring out there and realized that yeah, this old Air Force landing strip is still there. And then heading downriver further, well, there's another shot of it there, being at ground level, trees and vegetation starting to grow out of it. I'm not sure if you want to land an airplane on there anymore. Cedarvale, or the Meanskinisht Cemetery. So yeah, we came by jet boat, put the boat in right on the banks of the Skeena, and we were fortunate enough to have Lyle and Mary Dolan tour us around. I think I heard since then that Mary had passed away. Very nice lady, yeah, from Cedarvale there. So they had a lot of their family members buried in here, and they talked a lot about the history and that for our group. And one of the most memorable people, Robert Tomlinson and his wife Alice. Alice Arm, named after her. They were missionaries out on the coast, and then eventually moved to this place called Meanskinisht. And yeah, this what was founded in 1980 or 1888, and yeah, the headstones and that are all still there today, and rich history. They called this place the Holy City. And the Sternwheelers would make their way up. On a Sunday, they weren't allowed to stop there. They weren't allowed to drop freight off or anything. It was a day of rest and peace, and that. So very strict policies and rules there. I think there was 15 First Nations families there with Robert and Alice at the place, and they had a little sawmill on the other side of the river. There was a reaction ferry as well that went across the river, and yeah, they produced a lot of the lumber for a lot of the communities up and down the river. So yeah, quite a unique place though. And the museum that they run there. So we went in for a tour of their little museum in the village of, I'm not even sure, Gitseguecla. This one was the people of the river turns into and around an island and back out again. So quite a unique Tsimshian name for this unique village site. So yeah, in there was lots of old photographs and interesting things. But for me, one of the most interesting was this. And this was a copy of the telegraph records from back in the early 1900s. And if you went through the book, you could actually see all kinds of people that you would read about in some of the old historical books. Lots of the different captains, Captain Bonser, Johnson, and Busey, and these captains all made telegraph calls from there. So it was kind of interesting to see their names written down in the telegraph records for that time. So, yeah, and this you can drive to. You've all seen the Cedarvale Cafe there, and yeah, just take the Cedarvale Loop Road there, and yeah, you come right up in front of the museum, and Lyle's place is pretty much right beside it there. So I'm not sure what their policy is on going in there, and he's more than willing to allow us to go in and tour us around the cemetery and the little museum site there. So a couple of shots of this is on the opposite side of the river, the Gitwangak back road side. Yeah, the old general store post office in 1976. You can see how it's deteriorated in 1994. And this is what it looked like in 2016 when I was there. It's getting pretty decrepit and falling apart. But it's kind of a neat little spot there. There's a little path and bridge, a little waterfall and that across the road on the old site. The old reaction ferry was there as well, that ran at Cedarvale, just down below that. So lots of history, and the sawmill was on this side of the river as well. And then next is the little ghost town of Dorreen. So we visit this town on a few of our different tours, named after Ernest J. Dorreen. He was one of the engineers for the Grand Trunk to have construction camp at this spot, I think from 1908 to 1912 when they were building the railway. And yeah, it was one of the railway stations. They had a railway station there at Dorreen and Pacific, and you know, all the way up and down. There was little railway stations continually on the track there. And yeah, this was the general store, the post office, I think Justice of the Peace, the mining records. I mean, it was everything for the town of Dorreen. And you can see in this shot, it pretty much still looks the same, other than the veranda. That if I go back, you'll see that there's no veranda on that one, and there is on this one. But other than that, it's actually still looks pretty good. And this store was built in 1920, so this area was, I think the store was built by Thomas McCubbin, and then Dennis Horwell and his wife took it over and ran it for a number of years. Yeah, it's an interesting place. When we go to Dorreen, we have one of the locals there, Stuart Young. He tours us around, and he knows a lot of the history, who owns all the different places and what they're up to. And one of the families is the 100 Mile Diet people own a place there right on the banks of the Skeena. And you know, he's a fascinating guy, and he mows all the lawns for the entire place, keeps the well going and the little railway station, and he's working on his cabin. And yeah, he knows where all the old car remnants are, and just yeah. When if you're not there without him, you really don't get the full perspective on what's actually in Dorreen and what it's all about. So we're fortunate enough when we go there to have one of the locals tour us around, and he comes and goes throughout the year. He doesn't live there, but does have him and his daughter have each have a cabin there. So yeah. And one of the things I find the most interesting is the old relics and junkers that are there, hidden all over in the bushes, and you know, I often wonder, why are these vehicles all here? And I guess they had on the railway, they had a siding at one time where you could actually take vehicles in there on the railway, and you know, a ramp that you could take them off a boxcar and down into the community for the, I don't know what they had, 2, 3, 4 kilometers of road there. And yeah, they drive their vehicles around. And then I think it was in 69 or 67, they pulled out the siding. So there was no way of getting those vehicles back on the train and getting them out of there. And with no road access, they just, yeah, when they died, they died. They, you know, left them wherever they were, parked in the bushes. So this is one of my favorite ones. It's like a forest growing out of the back of the pickup truck there. Another one, an old Carmen Gia, just getting overgrown with the forest around it. And yeah, there's got to be, I don't know, a dozen if you look hard enough out there. So if you're into photography and that, these unique things, it's kind of a neat place. And this is the little railway resting area, I guess, or hut that's there now. This was, I think, built by the locals. They pulled it was in the 70s, they pulled the original station out of there and demolished it, and then the locals put up a spot here that you could rest in. So, you know, if it was cold in the winter time, there's a wood stove in there. Keep yourself warm while the train comes. And you know, with the rail, you never know when it's going to be there, so you may be waiting there for, you know, hours possibly. And one of the things that's interesting, they have the little stand here of the busy vest. So what you would do is just put this out by the track here. The train comes by. The conductor or engineer would see that, he would stop, and that would let him know that there was someone inside the cabin waiting to get picked up. So yeah, and anyone can hop on the train and head out there and go for a visit, ask to get let off at Dorreen or get picked up at Dorreen. There is a road in there now, I believe, from some recent logging, and it does have a gate on it, so you can't drive right into the town, I think, unless you have a key for it if you're one of the owners of some of the property, or you're in by train or by jet boat. And that's how we go in. There's a nice path all the way down to the river there, and you go by a bunch of the different houses and that. And this was a mining town too at one time, Mount Noss. They had a little tramway up there, and they did a fair bit of mining, I think, in the late 40s and early 50s. They had a school there, which was always a challenge. You know, I read some stories that, you know, the school teacher was registering, you know, 3-year-old kids. They're registering their dogs and cats and that to get the minimum of 8 people, so that the school board would still fund their school. So yeah, it was a real challenge there. And an agricultural area as well on the banks, that fertile soil of the Skeena River. You know, when we go there, there's still cherry trees and apple trees and blackberries and strawberries, and yeah, they're all, you know, gone wild now. But yeah, you can have a feast there of fruit in the summertime in July and August with all the fruits and berries and that are still growing from, from when the past residents were there. So yeah, real neat place, Dorreen. And Cordwood, something close to my heart. This was Bill McRae, who told me about this pile of cordwood lying on the banks of the Skeena River. So I kind of got cordwood fever there last year, and I was determined to find this cordwood, and talking to Bill, and he's giving me directions on, well, it's past this creek here, and there's this waterfall, and all these directions. I was tromping around in February, March, looking for this cordwood pile, and went back and visited him again, and gave me a bit better directions, and then finally walked through the forest and got to the river and walked right to it. And there was 6 piles of cordwood still lined up there on the banks of the Skeena River. So you can see here's a photo of the Hazelton, and you notice here these piles of cordwood that fed the boilers to power these Sternwheelers. So that was their fuel basically to get them up and down the river, was the piles of cordwood. So they could run, I think, 1 to 3 cords an hour, depending on, going upriver. They definitely burnt more. Going downriver was far less. And then how hard they were working. The Hazelton with Captain Bonzer. I mean, there were stories of them racing up and down the Skeena, full throttle basically, and going through massive amounts of cordwood. Making that return trip from Port Essington to Hazelton in 48 hours. So. Quite the extreme feat, considering I think the first Sternwheeler in 1891, the Caledonia, was 9 or 10 days it took them to get up there. So they really kind of got that dialed in, the river and the speed in that. But yeah, so cordwood. So here we are here on the edge of the Skeena. Here's all moss covered and that, but you can still make out some of the pieces here. All there was I think 5 or 6 piles like this that some contractor had cut. Not sure whether he ever got paid for them, but they would typically, the Sternwheelers would leave a note in that saying, we took 3 cords, 5 cords, 2 cords, whatever, and contract with different people to strategically put these piles all the way up the Skeena River, and so they could just pull in somewhere, and this would probably just got thrown down the bank. All the probably the available men on the boat would have come out and helped pile that on the boat and to get going as quick as possible. So you can see here, I am here looking at some of the pieces, individual pieces that you can still identify. So the last Sternwheeler was 1912 that ran the Inlander. So these piles are over 100 years old that are still sitting there today. So quite a unique thing. And yeah, I find this fascinating that there's still this sitting there from over 100 years ago, and it hasn't totally rotted away. And then you might recognize this, Kitselas Canyon. Kitselas, people of the canyon. The Kitselas historic site is just up here. So when we come through, we work with Webb Bennett from the Kitselas historic site, and he meets us right down in here. There's a little path up here, and picks us up and gives us a tour of the totem poles and the longhouses, and talks about the history of Kitselas and the Gitselasu. And yeah, just if you haven't done it already, do a tour of their historic site, and yeah, the guy is just a wealth of knowledge, and he can talk and talk and talk, and every tour we do with him is different. It's totally different information. He can, he's got more stuff in his head than, it just amazes me. And even his nephew, CJ, did a talk for us when Webb was busy, and yeah, just getting his perspective was totally different as well, and really interesting comparing them, and a very good speaker as well. He knew a lot about the history of their village sites and that, and they had a variety of them here. I think this was called Gitseguecla, people of the edge of the lake. This is kind of a big slow-moving area here. They had a village site over here. They had one down here called Gitwangak. I'm probably pronouncing these wrong. People of the fortress. So they had a big fortress up here, and they had big boulders and that, and basically, as Webb says, that they were toll keepers of the canyon. When someone wanted to come through the canyon, they had to pay a toll or a fee, with furs or fish or something to get through. And if they didn't, they would basically bombard them with boulders and rocks and that up above on the cliff sites above the canyon. So really an interesting place with lots of history. There was another one, Gittas, down here, people of the edge of there, people of the sandbar. So they had another site here. They actually had, I think, 4 or 5 different sites there. This here is the infamous Ringbolt Island. So this is lined with ringbolts all the way up here, this side as well. There's some down on this side, and I'm not sure, we never counted them, but there's probably, I would guess in that whole canyon, probably up to 20 ringbolts there. And those were used to help the sternwheelers winch themselves or pull themselves up through the canyon. And this photo was probably taken in August sometime. It's actually quite low. You know, there's no water coming through here. The current in here is actually pretty light right now. When we go through there in June at high water, this is really rocking, big standing waves and whirlpools and rollers. And you know, you can just imagine a sternwheeler trying to get itself up through one of these slots in here with the entire force of the Skeena River getting forced in here. And some of those sternwheelers, some of the bigger ones, the conveyor and operator, were 10 meters wide. So 140 feet long and 10 meters wide, trying to navigate. I mean, there wasn't much room for error. I think the Hazelton was 28 feet wide, so I had a bit more leeway, but yeah, trying to get up here and back down. So they would, you know, probably get in here somewhere. They'd send a couple guys out on a little skiff with a line, and they would paddle over to the island, wrap it through one of the ring bolts back to the winch or the capstan on the front of the boat, and then start winching themselves up through the canyon. And it's the same thing out in the Prince George or Fort George area. We had a canyon called Fort George Canyon, the Grand Canyon, the Fraser. They did the exact same thing there, winched the sternwheelers up. One of the most notable incidences was, I think it was July 6th or 7th, 1906 or 7, was the Mount Royal, the Hudson's Bay sternwheeler that came down on a summer day there and couldn't quite navigate the canyon here. It came down here and a big gust of wind actually pinned it up against the top of Ringbolt Island. And they were fortunate enough to get all the guests off the boat and onto Ringbolt Island here to safety. And then they tried to winch themselves straight to get them back off, and it actually put the kingpin, basically the big post in the middle of the boat. There was so much pressure on it, it shot down, I think, and split in half and rolled over. And yeah, the Mount Royal basically sunk and floated its way down to the bottom of the canyon. And I think there were stories of one man that was still inside actually survived in an air pocket in there, but 6 men did lose their lives in that. There's still stories of a treasure chest and that, all the valuables of, you know, sitting somewhere down here at the bottom of Kitselas Canyon. So who knows if that's true, because there really wasn't a lot left. You know, I think it was people down at the end of the canyon that finally realized that yeah, something had happened, as all these debris and remains of the Mount Royal had. Yeah, I read one story. One of the books I had back there was 2 brothers, and they had said that, I don't know, it was probably, I don't know how many days after that, but they saw this big, I don't know, wooden case floating down the river. This is out near Cassiar Cannery, and they went out in their boat to go find out what it was, and it was the butter from the Mount Royal, this big case of butter that had floated all the way down to Cassiar. And so yeah, they had butter for a whole year there. So yeah, it's kind of. The other interesting thing here at Ringbolt Island is the petroglyphs. There's a petroglyph up here in the middle of the island that I think they discovered that in 1969, and it was down lower down on the edge of this, and the water at high water was eroding it and cracking it, and they thought they were going to lose it. So in 1975, they hired a Sikorsky helicopter to basically kind of slab it off and pull it up and put it on top of the island. And yeah, Webb has a video there of when they actually did that, with the helicopter coming in and lifting, massive helicopter coming in and putting it on a spot on top of the island there. So here's some of the ring bolts. Like I said, there's all kinds of variety and types of them sitting there. But another one here is still actually got a bit of steel cable attached to it. This one looks like it's broken off. There's a copy, or the actual petroglyph there. They have an imprint of it in the Kitselas Historic site there. And yeah, Webb can, you know, he'll show you the picture of it there, and yeah, tell you exactly what he thinks it means and how he interprets the carving on there. And you know, they talk about the shamans being there, these religious individuals that were secluded on the island there, that were probably the ones who had carved these. And there's a few other ones in that area as well. So you know, there's actually, I think, multiple petroglyphs in and around the Kitselas Canyon area. The totem poles from the 4 different clans, just beautiful. The longhouses as well. So this is a historic site, and And now we're down to Usk, to the Reaction Ferry. So we come down here, we stop, have a look at this. One of the 5 remaining reaction ferries in the province. So, and there was all kinds of these back in the early 1900s. There's reaction ferries everywhere, on the Fraser and the Chaco River in Prince George, out here in the Skeena, there was all kinds of them. And yeah, they don't use the, any power basically. They're just using the current of the Skeena, the current of the river, and rudder to basically, on a cable and a bridle, to push themselves across the Skeena River. So yeah, it's kind of unique to go down there. They actually have a cable car, I think this was 69 or something, they put a cable car in here for the winter time. So this time of year, you'd use a cable car that has a little motor on it to power you across to the little community of Usk. And I know Helen McRae lived over there. She could probably tell you a lot more. I did see some photos and that of, in the winter time, they still had a ferryman there and little sticks and that where they would walk across the ice on the Skeena, or a little boat, I guess, to pull you across on the slush and ice so you wouldn't go under. And yeah, it sounded kind of harrowing trying to get across back in the day, before they had the cable car and you had to get across. So I just can't imagine those times when the ice chunks are coming down and you're trying to get across on a little boat when the cable car wasn't there. And then one of the things that I always find interesting, I don't know why, has anyone seen the Usk rabbit? Or for our German friends in the audience, the Ein Hase is the bunny in German. So this is the Usk Bunny. If you haven't seen it, there's an outline of it there. So when you're driving down the highway here on the river, you get a really good view of it. You can see, the ears up there in front of the bunny there. So it's kind of an interesting feature there. And one of the other things we stop at is the Comaham Headstone. You've heard of Comaham Lodge here. So they spell it with a K. But this memorial sits on private land, so if you ever wanted to go there, you have to ask them to get permission, and they did allow us to go on and stop with the boats and have a quick look at the headstone. So Chief Comaham was, I think, from Lac Willam's, and he was with his family. It was August 15th, a hot sunny day, 1873. They were paddling up towards the mouth of the Lake Helst River. And been a long, long trip with him and his daughter and his wife. And I think, the story goes, his daughter was kind of getting antsy and stood up in the canoe. And I guess they hit a bit of a whirlpool or something. Over she went into the fast-flowing water of the Skeena. And he was a big, strong, muscular man, from paddling all the time. He jumped in after her, and down he went as well. Neither one of them were ever seen again. They had First Nations from up and down the river coming to look for them, and no sign of them. So they had a headstone here commissioned and put it in the spot, I guess, roughly where they thought their bodies might be, or where they'd gone over. So yeah, this is the Comaham headstone. So yeah, it's still right on the banks of the river there. And this, when I was reading one of Gladys Blythe's books, she talked about this railway tunnel, so I got intrigued and wanted to find it down near Quinitza. And yeah, it's, I don't know, it might even be like up to 1 kilometer long. And I'm not saying to go in there and investigate, because there are big boulders and stuff hanging from the roof that look very, very unsafe. But just, even looking at it from the outside with everything overgrown and the moss and that, it is quite an eerie site. And I think they moved this just because of the avalanche hazards, and moved the tracks out further from the mountainside. And there's little air vents in there every few hundred meters and that. But yeah, quite the eerie site with the tracks still going in there, but all kinds of falling rock and that inside the tunnel. Skeena City. So I think this was an old sawmill site down at the mouth of the Kayaks River. So when you drive by, you can actually see, you can see these brick structures. There's a little island there too, I think, where the sawmill was. As well as like a little pile or island of trees. There's still lots of pilings in that down there at Skeena City. So it didn't last long. It was one of the railway stops as well. But yeah, when you're driving down, hit the Kayaks River, look to the left, and if you get out there, you can, there's all kinds of old bricks and that lying in there, and all kinds of old materials and pilings, and yeah, it's kind of an interesting little place if you're into poking around right off the edge of the highway there. So yeah, some more of the pilings lying there. Frizzel Hotsprings. George Frizzel had some hot springs there on the far side of the Skeena River, actually right across from the boat launch. So this is an old crab trap pulled in from one of the boats that I think Kelsey said her uncle was involved with. They helicoptered it in and put it in there, and yeah, so it is private land as well. So you have to be respectful. I know lots and lots of people go there, locals and that. To go for a dip in the hot springs, and I was there one time when the owner's son was there and talked to him about it, and I think they are still possibly trying to sell it, he said. And here's an old photo. You can see some of the old structures that were actually there at one time and what it looked like in the past. So quite the hopping place back then, with all kinds of buildings and that, and now it's very difficult to find if you don't know where it's at. It does not stick out. The hot springs are in 100 meters or so, so it's not the easiest place to find. You may have seen this driving along the highway on the other side of the railway tracks, the Chief Legalk Pictograph. If you're on the train, you'd have a real easy time seeing this. So he was a prominent chief at the time, and the story goes that they wanted to draw this pictograph to show all his wealth and that. And you can see these are, I think, boxes here. They're copper boxes, but basically something to show his prominence and wealth in the area. And an artist named Laquati, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, was supposedly lowered down on a cedar basket here and painted this from up above, and painted this. And it's amazing that it's still, all the weathering and the harshness of the Skeena area is still there today. Another close-up of it. Haysport. So another one of the cannery villages or sites on the lower Skeena. So this is all, this is just past where the highway branches up towards Rainbow Summit now. So the railway tracks are right beside here, but the highway is no longer beside here. And you can see the remnants of Haysport, the pilings and that, named after Charles Hayes, who went down the Titanic. And I often wonder if he was still alive at this time, if Haysport might have been a more prominent town, with him putting his backing and money and that in behind this cannery. It ended up being a cold storage facility for the canning area. It was also a train stop and for Port Essington and the other canneries that were all down on the Skeena and around the corner here. It was also a stop where they would get on the train or get off the train from the different village sites and that to come to work or to leave from work at the end of the season or beginning of the season. And there's stories of there being like a kilometer-long wait here for the train coming with everyone's belongings and that to get on the train at the end of the season, and not taking 5 to 6 hours to load everybody on at one time. So they also have a boardwalk there. So this is actually probably in better shape than the one at Port Essington. You can see that you probably wouldn't want to walk on it, but it's still pretty much intact to some extent. And if you're on the train and looked off the side there, you definitely see the boardwalk that's still there for their main street at Haysport. And Port Essington, or Spoke Chute, the Tsimshian name. This is an aerial shot of it here. They have the canneries here, 3 canneries. Robert Cunningham founded this in I think 1871. It was called Spoke Chute, or the fall camping place for the Tsimshian First Nations that came from all over to rest and camp and do a variety of things. A flat piece of land. But 1871, Robert Cunningham preempted some land there, and this was kind of one of the focal points, the starting points for the fur trade up to the interior and up to Hazelton. So this is they had this is Cunningham Corner. They had a hotel and some other buildings. The boardwalk would have come along here as well. The high-low, you'll see a picture of that, one of the old boats here, and then kind of the second bay here. The boardwalk came down here. The First Nations communities were here. The Kitselas and Gitseguecla have some deeded reserve lands there in this area. The sawmill was down here. Robert Cunningham's sawmill on Mill Creek were down here. They provided a lot of the wood for the different communities up and down. They have a place called Fintown here. So the Finnish boat builders actually lived at this end. They had the Japanese, the Chinese. So it was quite the place, especially during fishing season, and having 3 canneries there as well, all in this one location. So in quite a long history from 1871 of people, buildings and that from 1871 to probably the 60s when there was multiple fires there that took down most of the buildings, and really not a lot left for a lot of the buildings. One of the other interesting things is right here. This is George Frizzel, who had the hot springs, his wharf for the butcher shop, and they brought in cows, live cows, on the Union steamship, and they really had nowhere to graze them. They did have it was a Japanese fellow who was down here somewhere, tried to graze dairy cows and that, but everyone said the milk tasted gross and like skunk cabbage and that, because that's what the cows were feeding off of, so it didn't go over too well. But they did bring in live cows, and then when they would butcher them, they would throw them over the wharf, and they would end up here. So you'll see some photos of that. This is also Haysport is on this side here. I'll talk about Shirley Mills, which is down here. Around the corner here is Claxton and Carlisle. Osland is down here. Cassiar Cannery is down here. And Cannery Row goes in this direction here towards North Pacific. So just to give you an idea of the lay of the land of the lower. And this is called the Boneyard down here. We'll talk about what they did there. There's the boardwalk, the main street at Port Essington, what's left of it. This is what we call the boneyard of Port Essington, all the skulls and that from the cows that were butchered and that left. It's still sitting there at low tide. You can see all these skulls and bones in amongst the pilings. The high-low. So this was a little crabbing boat, and the lady who actually I think it was her father or grandfather owned this, and had told me a story how she was out there crabbing with him, and at nighttime her father would lay down some blankets on the engine compartment, and that's where she would go to sleep, as to stay warm and that on top of the engine. And she had memories of him going around in the inner kind of harbor there crabbing and that. And this is what it looked like back in the day. And now it looks like this, just sitting there rotting away. Shirley Mills. So this was a water-powered sawmill over, just like I said, down below Port Essington on the highway side of the Skeena, and you can see the old stave piping here that was from the Boneyard Creek, or a diverted creek, and went down to help power the sawmill. I think it was from 44 or 38 to 44, I think, when this ran, this sawmill. It was, I think, one of the original people that preempted land. There was a lady named Kate Herman. Her husband, Peter Herman, had the cannery at Ladysmith Island at Port Essington, and he ended up, I think, drowning in the Skeena. But yeah, this was named after a guy named George Shirley Mills, and the Jacobson brothers, I think, who had some sawmills down in the 100 Mile House area eventually. They were related to them. So you can see here, there's the wooden stave piping that kind of runs all the way up here. The creek is probably in here somewhere. And this is probably about 1 kilometer long. I followed this one day, went up the creek, and then there's a little dam up here, and they diverted it into this wooden piping and then down. I think this might have been, they had a little lever there to stop the water, so that they ever had to turn it off. It was just like a wooden plunger that they could put down in front of the stave piping, or through the stave piping, to shut off the water to the mill. And there's the remnants of the dam. This is all it was some boards, and you can see some of the boards still lying right here. And this is how they built it up, just a little rock or wooden crib here, and then they diverted it into this, and just, thousands of these metal rings. And there's the old wooden stave piping. There are the remnants of it running down from right here all the way down for about 1 kilometer down to the edge of the Skeena there, where they powered the sawmill. And this is what remains today. A bunch of old oilers and belts or pulleys and that there. So this is the boneyard. They called this the boneyard as well, because this is where a lot of the trees and stumps and that from the Skeena would flow down this really calm, flat, shallow area out here, very shallow. They would just rest there. But when they were doing their commercial fishing, the fishermen would drag and would be drifting with their nets. They'd get caught in the stumps and logs, and that would cost them a lot of time and money and effort trying to untangle them. So they had a snag scow. Originally, it was basically a paddle wheeler, in a sense, that went out there with this big A-frame hook and dragged these things over into the shallow water here to get them out, so that the fishermen wouldn't be getting caught up on them. And I think originally the company, Robert Cunningham, hired a boat to do that, and after that I think the fisheries took over and took care of that job to pull all the snags and that in closer to shore. So, but you can see these belts here, these big pulleys and wheels and that. They still had some of the belting here all wrapped together with leather still sitting there that would have been wrapped around one of these, so it's still kind of interesting that this has still survived that long as well, from the 40s until today. The next cannery down on that side is Carlisle Cannery, another big cannery. You see this massive places and structures and that were there, and these were kind of one of the first ones. It was kind of more out in the open water in the ocean area, and kind of strategic as well. A lot of the fishing was done down in this area, and the government continually kept moving the fishing boundary down the Skeena River. I mean, Aberdeen Cannery was one of the furthest ones up above the kayaks, and even Haysport, that was the demise of that. It was above the fishing boundary eventually, so it just wasn't as feasible to have your cannery above the boundary. But these ones were down kind of right in the hot spot of where the fishing took place. And Carlisle, this had the bell, I heard as well, that they would, Sunday afternoon when you're allowed to start fishing again, the big bell would go off, so all the canneries and fishermen out in the river could hear it and they could start fishing. And this was strategically placed here at Carlisle. And this is what's left today. A bunch of pilings in that. There is a couple of structures and buildings here, and then lots of junk and debris on the bottom of this at low tide. A little island here with a bunch of ringbolts on it that they pounded in right in front of Carlisle. And Claxton, this is the next one down, called Claxton Cannery. It had this interesting design here, the star-shaped design, where the boardwalks kind of came out, and they had a big concrete structure here in the middle. And yeah, I mean, you just look at all the stuff that was there back in the day, and this is what remains now. You can see how this is where that star-shaped structure would have gone out, and there's a concrete foundation right here, but all kinds of remnants and debris in that lying in the mud here at low tide. And there was one more cannery further down called Standard, another 3 or 4 kilometers down the Skeena as well. And you look across, this would have been that Shirley Mill somewhere up over here somewhere. And just a map to show you where all the canneries were, all over the place. So here was Carlisle, Claxton, Standard, Oceanic, Cassiar, Sunnyside, North Pacific, Inverness, Dominion. There's Haysport. You can see all the ones right here in the Port Essington area, Alexandria, Balmoral, and you had the 3 at Port Essington as well. So yeah, just all in this area was basically the hot spot for all the different salmon canneries. And Osland, the Icelandic community on Smith Island, they're almost across from Cassiar Cannery, and their most unique feature there is this boardwalk about 1 kilometer long that Highway still maintains. So they pay locals to basically maintain this boardwalk that runs along the entire community with all the old houses and that. So it was another fishing community. There's a Japanese family that built a lot of boats there as well until World War II started, and I think they were taken inland to one of the camps, so that finished off the boat building, and they provided a lot of the students for the school and that. So and all these residents came from Iceland. They went to Manitoba, and then some went over to Haida Gwaii, and then over to Smith Island, to Osland here, and some from Manitoba, and then over directly to Osland. So some old boats there as well, still lying on the banks. Some of the old houses and that, boardwalks going up to them. Some are in really good shape. Some have been, are still lived in by, part-time residents. Other ones are not. An old boat shed or net house or something there. And then Cassiar Cannery. So we stay here at a couple of our different tours as well. So this is one of the old canneries, the longest running cannery of all the ones in the Skeena there. And these are the old manager houses that Justine Crawford and her husband Mark have restored. And they're one of the, I think they're in the top 10 unique accommodations in BC. And at the end of the road past North Pacific, and you can book a night, weekend, whatever at Cassiar Cannery. I think they have decks out in front of these now. It's just beautiful when you're out there on a nice day, sitting out on the deck, watching the Skeena River go by, and yeah, it's quite the interesting place, and they've done a ton of work for these houses. So this is what it looked like back in the day. You can see the old manager houses here. The wharf, the dock is still all pretty much there. And now I think it comes off right here, and then most of this is gone, but there's still remnants of some of that stuff there. Here's what their dock looks like today. Old boat there sitting at Cassiar, and this is the Cannery Row or the Skeena Slough, where they would have had Sunnyside, and there's North Pacific and Inverness. North Pacific, the historic site now. Many of you have probably been there. This is what it looked like back in the day. This is what it looks like today. They're restoring this now, redoing this deck, and the old manager had said that they had some grant money to, I think, replace this, and we're hoping to have concerts and events and that out there now on the big workspace out here, which would be kind of a nice addition to have some community events going on out there. And just the colors and that too. I mean, the rusty red roofs and that for photography and that is quite interesting. This is, we go a little bit further on our tour and look at some other interesting things. Hospital on Hospital Island. So this is off of Digby Island, and this was the hospital that they built that they thought when the railway came in 1912, there was going to be this huge influx of immigrants coming into the Skeena and into Prince Rupert and that, and they thought, a lot of them were going to have diseases and other things, and they would have to quarantine them. So they built this hospital on this little island in front of Dodge Cove, and then they built a boardwalk across it to the mainland, or not the mainland, but across to Digby Island, and then they put a doctor's house there. So the doctor would look after, I guess, the ill patients and that. And from what I read, there was only 1 or 2 people that actually ever were in the hospital, so it didn't get much use at the time, and I guess there wasn't as many people coming as they thought, and not as many sick people either. So this is what it looked like back in the day, the old hospital. And you can see there's the boardwalk going across to the island. And this is what the doctor's house looks like today. I mean, it's overgrown. You can see it's got a forest growing out of the roof, and looks pretty eerie looking, and 3-story structure there. But really not a whole lot of use, but kind of an interesting site. This is off of in the Prince Rupert Harbor. They call it the man who fell from heaven, or the man who fell from the sky. And I'm not sure of the entire history, but some of the First Nations communities say it was a young man that was banished or went to go find himself, and went into seclusion and fasted and that, and was basically taken up into the sky. And then when he came back, he actually fell through this hole in the sky and planted himself down here on this, and took the people back to show that this is what had actually happened to him. So it's kind of a life-size pictograph of someone who had fallen from the sky. And so this is now Porcher Island. This is another cannery, Humpback Bay, or Porcher Island Cannery on Porcher Island across the ocean there. And it's privately owned now by an individual as well, but still standing. It only operated, I think, for 4 years as a cannery, and then they opened it as a gillnet station, and provided gas and fuel and other services and that for the fishing community. It did that for a number of years, and then was privately sold to someone. So cormorants or something on some of the old pilings there. The structure's still standing, and lots of old boats in that in Humpback Bay, just old relics in that, actually in the bay there. And then Una River. This is on one of our cannery tours. We go to Una River on Porcher Island there, and one of the old boats there lying on the banks there, and we're fortunate enough to have one of the locals, Jan Lemon, being able to tour us around in their little fish hatchery, who knows all the history and all the stories from the area. A very nice lady. And you can see there's kind of the inlet into Una River, the bridge going across, and some of the old boats and boathouses, and kind of just this mystical, unique place. Some more boathouses with reflections in that. The Rainbow House. So when I was there, I looked at this house and was going to take a picture of it, and the gentleman who owned it, him and his wife were outside, and came over, and I talked to them and asked them about the story of the Rainbow House. I said, why did you picture your house like a rainbow? And And they said, well, it's so gloomy here at Una River, we just thought it'd be a nice thing to, you know, make everyone feel better and that. And then his wife came over and told me that he was actually colorblind. So he actually had to take in the benefits of the rainbow house, and she had to go through and mark each board with which color because he had no idea what the house was going to look like. So, interesting story, the rainbow house. And some murals and that, just some colorful things on some of the buildings there that some of the locals have done. Just kind of all kinds of knickknacks and old fishing related stuff there. Another boathouse, all kinds of boathouses, and there's a little loop you can do, a couple of bridges that you can walk basically the entire community. It's an interesting one though as well, that you can only get in there at the, you know, a mid to high tide as well into the harbor and that. So, you know, they have a ferry that goes there or a boat that goes there, but on some days if the tide's not right, it actually can't get into the community. So I always find that interesting how they build these places in places that you can't get in there all the time. Same with Osland. It is a place now that you can only get in there at a mid-tide or higher as well, and goes totally dry. At the time they had a north dock, it's kind of hard to explain, that went out further that they could get out at most tides or most low tides. But yeah, nowadays all their boats go high and dry from the locals there on their dock. The dock goes totally dry. Same thing at Cassiar Cannery. Their dock goes high and dry at the low tide, so it's something that you always have to watch out for down there. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. So not sure if anyone has any questions or anything. I'll stick around for a while. There's we have a bunch of old books and that, historical books at the back if anyone's interested in looking at those. Some pamphlets and brochures from some of our tours. If any of you are interested, I can answer questions on any of those as well. So.
Questions for our guest? Well, in the absence of any questions, I'll thank Rob for coming and give you some warm mittens to take back to Prince George with you. Thanks so much for that wonderful tour. So please join us 2 weeks from now. We should be having Lawrence Jansen here, formerly with the BC Ministry of Transportation. He's an avalanche technician. He's recently taken a job with Bruce Jack Mines, so he makes no promises as to whether he'll be here or whether he'll be responsible for some avalanche prevention. But if he makes it, he'll tell us about his work in terms of avalanche science, prediction, and prevention.